Installing roofs on businesses and homes is incredibly dangerous. One slip, you could be dead. But despite there being federal regulations prohibiting anyone underage from working this job, countless migrant children are building roofs at the risk of their own lives. In fact, the New York Times didn't just find 100 kids who are working on America's roofs right now. That was the number they spoke to, some of which who started when they were elementary school age. We're talking about kids moving heavy bundles of shingles up ladders without safety gear, balancing on steep inclines for hours at a time, and working through heat waves on black tar rooftops that scorch and blister hands. And on social media, they're called rooferitos, often sharing videos from the roofs of houses and that steep drop downward. And in the case of one Anthony Padilla, his fall didn't kill him, but it did leave him with severe brain trauma. His memory and body left in shambles. You know, Anthony, he spent most of his childhood in Honduras with his family, living in a one-room house with his 4 siblings. He's been working since a very, very young age. And once he was 15, he left Honduras and he came to the States in 2021. You know, Anthony found work in South Carolina as a roofer. He was making enough money to cover room and board at his uncle's trailer nearby and sending as much as $300 back home to his family every month. But last spring, when he was working on this massive beach house, he slipped while collecting shingles, falling 30 feet onto the cement patio below. He fractured his skull, punctured a lung, and he was bleeding internally, all while breathing through a tube in his neck. His family called in from Honduras to say their goodbyes, and the surgeon wrote that his outcome did not look good. But 3 months after that fall, Anthony woke up and he was discharged. But no rehabilitation center would take him without insurance. So he was just sent back to his uncle's trailer, unable to speak or even stand, and he stayed inside for months. And after 5 months, he still couldn't lift his arm, he was unsteady on his feet, and he couldn't understand basic questions. Like he couldn't remember what state he was in or even his father's name. Well, eventually, he could speak again. Once that happened, he began asking when he could go back home to Honduras. With that, you had his parents who had no idea how they were going to support him, right, for numerous reasons, but also they live hours from the type of medical care that he needs. So you've got them also asking him to stay put until there's some foreseeable path forward for his care. And so now, at 17, Anthony spends his days scrolling through TikTok, seeing countless videos like the ones he used to take, rooferitos on the tops of buildings with steep drops just steps behind them. And a big thing is that there are so many others like Anthony, with labor organizers and social workers saying they're seeing more and more migrant children getting seriously injured on roofing crews in recent years. And you had the New York Times finding several. A 16-year-old in Arkansas fell off a roof and shattered his back. A 15-year-old in Florida got burns all over his body when he slipped from a roof onto a vat of hot tar. And one kid in Illinois stepped through a skylight and fractured his spine. When these kids get hurt, contractors often refuse to pay for their medical bills. Or like in Anthony's case, he would likely qualify for workers' compensation, but the company hired to do the roof subcontracted the job out to a smaller company who subcontracted it again, which just left 3 companies arguing for over a year about who's actually responsible for Anthony's workers' comp. And in fact, as I'm recording this, they are still in the process of settling the case. But even with that, I mean, we're talking about the kids who survive. According to the Department of Labor, 100 roofers die on the job every single year, mostly from falls. And a big thing here is we don't actually have the data for how many child roofers sustain injury or die. That's because the child roofers aren't supposed to exist. But here's the thing we do know. Children working on construction sites are 6 times more likely to be killed compared to those working in other positions, with roofing being the second most dangerous job for kids behind agriculture. Like in one case, you had a 15-year-old who was installing metal roofing on a plant in Alabama when the insulation that he was standing on gave way and he fell to the concrete down below. And after his death, OSHA found that the crew working on that roof had 9 workers and only 6 safety harnesses. Now, with everything that we've talked about, of course, it brings us to a question. If U.S. federal law bans anyone from under the age of 18 from roofing, how are these kids not only getting, but keeping these jobs? Well, according to reports, subcontractors are struggling to find adults to fill these positions. And this is you have roofing industry experts saying that the South has seen residential building booms while the industry battles a labor shortage. So then these subcontractors, they turn to kids, who then oftentimes say that they're 18 and those in charge just don't ask for any proof. It doesn't hurt that they're cheaper to employ. Now, in some cases, crew bosses keep kids on the ground out of a concern for their safety, or having them pick up loose shingles or lifting bags up the ladders. But in many places, being on the roof pays nearly double what working on the ground does, which ends up being a strong incentive for these kids that are trying to support themselves and their families. Interestingly, with this, you had one crew boss saying that she hires underage workers because she doesn't like turning away kids in need, notably going on to say that she isn't worried about inspectors, saying they only visit certain neighborhoods and sometimes they let you know when they're going to show up. And the Department of Labor, who's in charge of enforcing child labor laws, they've done very little to address labor problems within the roofing industry. I mean, they brought an average of 7 cases per year in the last decade. And that, well, you had the Times saying they spoke with 20 child migrant workers as young as 13 years old on day labor sites, and that was just from one small city. Also, regarding the investigators, one career investigator told the Times that while she responds to all tips regarding child labor, she just isn't going to chase it down, saying, I'm not going to make it my duty to go out and look for it. You know, even when OSHA does respond to accidents where kids are killed or they're seriously injured, inspectors sometimes fail to follow their own policy and alert child labor investigators. Sometimes they let the cases drop entirely. Now, worth noting, after the Times started looking into this, the Labor Department saying they're revisiting some of these cases, so hopefully we see something something from that. But in an ideal world, especially as more and more of these fucking newspapers are shutting down, the Times or any outlet would need to pick up this story for people to do their job. Because really all we're talking about at this point is how many cases are being swept under the rug. It's not an if. And unless something's done, these contractors are gonna just go on hiring kids. But as we wait to see if any sort of meaningful change can happen here, I gotta pass the question off to you. Not only generally, what are your thoughts on this situation, but specifically, whether you're a contractor, a subcontractor, or you've just worked on job sites. Because when I was young, I worked on some job sites, and there's a lot of fucking sketchy, under the table shit going on. But I'd love to know your thoughts, your experiences, and also what do you think is gonna happen here?